I'd like to see a serious conversation started in this country. The word Sharia law has been bandied around as a threat. I don't know where this came from. Why is it being discussed in the United States as a threat? Maybe you can enlighten me during the Q&A, and I'd be happy to answer. But American Muslims have been living under the American laws for ever since they came to this country, which, by the way, is before the 1600s. A lot of people think that Muslims are recent visitors to this country or immigrants, which is not true. I would like to end by reading a verse from the Quran, which should guide all our actions, Muslim and non-Muslim alike. It's chapter 14, verses 24-25. It says, "A goodly word is like a goodly tree, whose roots are firmly fixed, and its branches reach out to the heavens. It brings forth its fruits at all times by the leave of the Lord." So let us all strive for the good word. Thank you.
Good morning. My daughter Mary Margaret used to tease me about 10 years ago when I was 55. She'd say, "It must be fun being 55. You get to meet new people every day." It was an expression she started using because she introduced me to her friend Kelly one day, and a couple days later, Kelly was over again, and she said, "You met Kelly?" And I said, "I don't think so." She said, "Yeah, Dad, you did. It was 2 days ago." I get that feeling when we have this discussion because it seems that every time there's a crisis, we have to start talking again about what is this all about and who are these people and what's this religion all about. And at some point, I think it'll begin to dawn on us that there's something we need to know and that we ought to pay attention to, but let's do it one more time. It was shortly after September 11th, I was invited by Bill Clinton to NYU to a panel that he had organized on a topic identical to the one we're doing today. Americans were in shock, and people in New York in particular, and had a lot of questions that they wanted answered. We recognized the importance of dealing that, and so what we did with this panel was begin to talk about who Muslim Americans were. What I did before I went to the session is I called a lot of friends to get some anecdotes and sort of poured over my mind in the 30 years I've been doing this work, and got a doctorate in Islamic studies, and have organized Arab Americans for about as long as I can remember, and have been polling Arab Americans and American Muslims. And so putting it all together, I told some stories about a young woman who was a pre-med student and idealist par excellence, who told me one day, she said, "I'm not going to be like my father. I want to practice my religion by opening a clinic for the poor." And she said, "That would be how I'd practice my faith." And then there was a guy, Ahmed, I knew in Cincinnati, who reminded me so much of my father as he took me to the mosque that he had helped raise the money to build. And he was so proud of the building. And he toured me around and showed me that he got this from Syria and he had that donated from Lebanon, and he brought all these wonderful artifacts in. And like I said, it reminded me of my father and my uncles who built the Maronite church in Utica, which is incidentally going to be celebrating a 100th year anniversary of the parish community, not of the church itself. And that sense that immigrants get, the pride they have in building and sort of establishing their institutions in the New World. He died a couple of years later. But then 2 years after he died, I had the opportunity to get his son an internship at the White House. And as we walked across Pennsylvania Avenue on his first day to work, the kid teared up and he said, "If only my dad could see me now, he'd be so proud. This is why he came to this country." There were other stories. A young Yemeni girl in Dearborn who, in the middle of Ramadan, there was a fight in the school. It started because the principal insisted that the Muslim students had to go to cafeteria during lunchtime. The kids asked for the opportunity to go to a study hall. He said no. And so During the lunch period, kids were throwing ham at the Muslim students, and it was, of course, something, a provocation, which ultimately turned out to be a fight. This 14-year-old girl, we had a town meeting, and she came to me and she said, I had the solution. I went to the principal and I told him, the problem is that we don't understand each other. And she said, they don't understand my culture, and so if you would help us, maybe we could explain our culture to them. And he snapped back at her, my job is not to have you teach your culture, girl. It's for you to learn my culture. She continued to fight, and she actually does the work that she had set out to do at 14 today as a full-time professional in intercultural communication. And there were so many other stories of people who reminded me so much of my own background and of the background, I'm sure, of so many of you here, and that is people who, like us, are Americans, who have pride in their faith, pride in their heritage, who share the American dream and who want to succeed, and who value the values of America. It is an American story. It's a community not unlike other communities. And it's interesting because the anecdotes tell that story, but our polling does as well. We've polled, as I said, not only Arab and Muslim Americans, but we've polled ethnic Americans. We've polled Irish and Italian and Polish, and we put together a book I did a few years back called Ethnic Americans, What They Really Think. And what we learned about Muslims then was really quite fascinating. First of all, the diversity of the community is extraordinary. Probably the single largest group is African American. After that, you have Arab American and South Asian American, but growing numbers of Iranian Americans and Turkish Americans and folks from African countries who, again, each one of them, as you meet them in their communities or on their own, remind you of the immigrant story of every other group that's come to America in terms of their values, in terms of their aspirations, in terms of the fact that you get into the cab and you talk to the guy and he's doing his day job, but he's got a night job, and he's got 3 kids, and he'll tell you with enormous pride of what they're doing in college. It's the American story. And like I said, that comes through in the polling that we've done. What we learn is, for example, that the values of Muslims in America track closely the values of other ethnic Americans, in particular Catholics. Like Catholics, they lean progressive on a number of fiscal issues, like, for example, supporting health care or strengthening Social Security or school funding or funding to clean the environment, but then they lean conservative on social issues, like family values or abortion or tough on crime or, and this might be interesting to you, tough on laws that would fight terrorism. The income of Muslim Americans is slightly higher than the average, the national average. And mosque attendance is actually about the same as church attendance. And the values of those who are regular mosque attendees track closely with those who are regular church attendees, and those who aren't track closely with those who aren't regular church attendees. And the belief, as I said, in the American dream is the same. This is what we know. And this is the story that we told after 9/11, and it's the story that we tell again today. President Bush got it completely right. The problem is not Islam. The problem are people who have used Islam to commit violent acts against our country and our people. But what happened after 9/11, when we were all asking these questions, is that a cottage industry of those who actually had an axe to grind against the religion of Islam and against Muslims and against Arabs, I believe in particular, they ended up providing most of the answers. They wrote books and got them published. They testified before Congress, and they dominated the airwaves on radio and on television. I'll never forget a hearing that was held in the Senate on Islam, featuring 3 guys who, actually, if you had the reverse and the 3 Muslims were testifying on the nature of Judaism in an Arab country, you'd hear whoops and yells. But it was acceptable for this to happen. And the lies they told and the bigotry that they spread was horrific. And yet, people were just nodding in the audience because that's all they heard. That's all actually they were in a position to hear. These guys conflated every incident of violence as somehow evidence that they were right. And they've done enormous damage. Shortly after 9/11, when we polled overall America, what we found is that people still had a very favorable attitude toward Islam. And today when we poll, they do not. Back then when we polled, 3/4 of Americans said they felt they needed to know more. And they wanted to know more about Islam and about Muslims. And today, less than half say they need to know more. The fact is that unfavorable views have risen, but bad information has increased as well, so that people think they know. And that's the dangerous thing. I mean, ignorance and certitude are probably the most dangerous combination of all. I mean, you talked about Sharia and I mean, we went into Iraq not having a clue, and yet a month later people were talking about Sunnis and Shia as if they actually knew what the difference was, and madrasas and Wahhabis and Salafi, and if you could put 2 words in a sentence, you became an expert and you got on television to talk about it. If this weren't enough, this cast of characters organized not only information campaigns, but they actually organized politically. They were the ones who stopped the Khalil Gibran Academy in New York City. And they were the ones now, the very same cast of characters who are organizing against Park 51. This is a danger. As Salam correctly pointed out, it is a danger to the image of our country abroad. It flies in the face of the wise counsel offered by George W. Bush. It's a danger to our values, but it is also a danger to the very social fabric of who we are as a country. A few years back, I was invited to speak in Warsaw and in Prague and other places in Europe to talk about the difference. People wanted to know, what's the difference between America and Europe, and why are your Muslim and Arab communities not alienated? Why have they risen to the top in your countries in ways that they have not done so here? I began, and I spoke about the fact that we as a nation have always been different. We've been different in the sense that America as a concept is different, and America as a reality is different. No ethnic group defines who we are. No religion defines who we are. Bigots have had their way over time, but in the end, ultimately, the notion of America as an absorptive entity that transforms people into America. You don't just get a passport here. You get an identity as a new person. It's an alchemy that transforms you into becoming American. You can be a Kurd in Germany for 3 generations, and you'll always be a Turk. You can be an Algerian in France for 3 generations, and you'll always be an Arab. Or you can be Pakistani in London, and you'll always be a Paki. You can get citizenship, it's an effort, but you never get the nationality. You never get that sense that I'm part of this people. The narrative doesn't include you. I, as a kid, when we studied Lewis and Clark, I went with them. When Washington crossed the Delaware, I was on the boat. I mean, there was the sense you had that it was your story. It wasn't somebody else's story. That's who we are as a country. And what troubles me is that what is at stake in this Park 51 story is not about a building. And it's not about a place. It is about the narrative of who we are as a people. And if these guys win, whatever the outcome, but if these guys win, then America won't be America anymore. And the story of the Muslim community here may very well be like that of the Muslim community in France or in Germany. And that would be devastating for the social fabric of our country. And I will leave it there, and I thank you. And I hope we don't have to have this discussion again in this way. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zogby. I know we have a lot of questions, and before we get to the questions, just a couple ground rules. First, make sure it's a question and not a speech. If you want to make a speech, you can do your own panel. And then, out of respect for our friends from C-SPAN, they have a boom mic, so they're going to come around. I know you guys are kind of crammed in here, so they'll come around and make their best effort to get the mic above you so that you can have your question heard to the rest of the country. Let me start off with a quick question and kind of